The marble floors of Wellington Tower gleamed under the late afternoon sun, but Margaret Chen barely noticed them anymore. As CEO of Chen Industries, she'd walked these halls for 15 years, her Louboutins clicking against the polished surface with the confidence of someone who'd built an empire from nothing. Today, however, her purposeful stride faltered when she heard something unexpected echoing from the empty conference room on the 47th floor, her daughter's laughter, genuine and unguarded, a sound that had become increasingly rare in their penthouse apartment. Margaret's hand froze on the door handle. Through the narrow window, she could see 12-year-old Emma sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by textbooks and papers, completely absorbed in conversation with Miguel Santos, the evening janitor. Her first instinct was alarm. What was her daughter doing here at 6 p.m., and why was she studying with the cleaning staff? But something made her pause, made her watch instead of interrupt. Miguel, a man in his 60s with silver hair and weathered hands, was pointing at Emma's math worksheet, his face animated with an excitement that seemed out of place for someone explaining fractions. Emma was nodding eagerly, scribbling notes, asking questions without the usual defensiveness she showed her expensive tutors at home. Margaret felt something twist in her chest. When was the last time she'd seen her daughter so engaged, so present? She'd hired Miguel 2 years ago through the building's management company, barely registering his existence beyond the fact that her office was always spotless when she arrived at dawn. He was part of the invisible army that kept the corporate world running, someone she'd never thought to know beyond a polite nod in passing. Margaret pushed open the door gently. "Emma? What are you doing here?" Her daughter's face flushed with guilt, but Miguel stood calmly, setting down the pencil he'd been using to diagram a problem. "Mrs. Chen, please don't be upset. Emma came to wait for you after school, and she had homework. I just offered to help while she waited." "Mom, I know I should have called, but Miguel used to be a math teacher. Did you know that? He's better at explaining things than Mr. Peterson ever was." Emma's words tumbled out in a rush, defensive but also pleading. Margaret looked at Miguel with new eyes. "A teacher?" He nodded, a slight smile playing at his lips. 28 years. I taught high school mathematics in Mexico City before I came here." There was no bitterness in his voice, just a simple statement of fact. The question hung in the air, unspoken but deafening. How does a career teacher end up mopping floors in corporate America? Margaret had built her success on asking hard questions, on seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles, but she'd stopped asking questions about the people who existed outside her carefully curated world. Over the next week, Margaret found herself manufacturing excuses to work late, arriving at times when she knew Miguel would be there. She watched from a distance as the tutoring sessions continued, as Emma's confidence visibly grew, as her daughter actually looked forward to homework for the first time in years. And she began to notice other things too. Miguel tutored the security guard's son in the lobby during his break, helping him prepare for the SAT. He'd leave encouraging notes for the stressed-out associates who worked through the night, little messages in careful English reminding them to take care of themselves. He knew everyone's names, asked about their families, carried photos of his own children, both doctors, he mentioned proudly, both educated on his teacher's salary before the economy collapsed and his school closed. One evening, Margaret finally asked him directly. "Miguel, why didn't you try to teach here? In America?" His answer was simple, heartbreaking in its honesty. "I tried, Mrs. Chen. For 2 years, I applied everywhere. But my credentials don't transfer easily, and I'm 63 years old. Schools want young teachers with American degrees. I have a granddaughter with cerebral palsy back home who needs therapy. My pride or my family, it wasn't a difficult choice." That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She stood in her floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, the city that had given her everything, and realized how much she'd stopped seeing. She'd fought her way up from a working-class immigrant family, remembered her own mother cleaning houses to put Margaret through business school, remembered the kindness of strangers who'd helped when the system seemed designed to exclude them. When had she forgotten? When had success made her blind? The next morning, Margaret called an emergency meeting with her executive team and her head of human resources. "I want to launch a new initiative," she announced. "I want Wellington Tower to become the first building in Manhattan with a full employee development program, not just for our corporate staff, but for everyone who works here. Custodial staff, security, cafeteria workers, everyone." Her CFO frowned. "Margaret, that's not really our responsibility. Those are contracted employees." "Then we'll change the contracts," she said firmly. "We're going to offer education benefits, credential assistance, English classes, career counseling. And we're going to start asking what talents we're wasting by seeing people only as their current job titles." The program launched 3 months later. Miguel was its first success story and its first employee. Margaret hired him as Director of Educational Outreach, a newly created position focused on mentoring programs for employees' children and connecting underutilized talent within the building to new opportunities. His first assignment was to identify others like himself, people with hidden skills, forgotten dreams, credentials that didn't translate but talents that could transform. He found them everywhere. The night security guard who'd been an engineer in Syria. The cafeteria manager who'd run her own restaurant in Haiti. The delivery coordinator who'd been a nurse in the Philippines but couldn't afford the recertification process. An entire invisible workforce of extraordinary people, reduced to their most basic economic function because the system had no space for their stories. Emma became the program's youngest advocate, creating a presentation for her school about the people we don't see that went viral on social media and caught the attention of other corporations. She'd found her voice, her purpose, in understanding that everyone has a story worth knowing. The initiative spread. Other companies in the building adopted similar programs. Then other buildings across the city. Margaret was interviewed by news outlets, invited to speak at conferences, but she always insisted Miguel share the stage. "This isn't charity," she'd say. "It's just good business to recognize the assets you already have." A year later, Margaret stood in that same conference room where she'd first discovered Emma and Miguel studying together. It was now the Wellington Community Learning Center, open to all building employees and their families. Miguel was teaching an evening algebra class to a group of teenagers, including his granddaughter, who'd finally been able to come to the United States for treatment, covered by the company's expanded healthcare program. Emma sat in the front row, now volunteering as a tutor herself, helping younger students the way Miguel had helped her. She caught her mother's eye and smiled, and Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. She'd spent 15 years building a business empire, measuring success in stock prices and quarterly earnings. But this, watching her daughter discover empathy, seeing Miguel's dignity restored, knowing that dozens of families were building better futures, this felt like the first thing she'd built that actually mattered. The marble floors still gleamed, but Margaret walked them differently now. She knew the names of the people who polished them, knew their stories, saw their humanity. And she'd taught her daughter the most important lesson she'd ever learned, that success means nothing if it doesn't lift others up, that kindness is never wasted, and that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones with the most to teach us. In the end, it wasn't about a CEO discovering a janitor's hidden talents. It was about a woman remembering her own humanity, about a daughter learning to see beyond surfaces, about a community built on the simple revolutionary act of treating everyone with dignity. Miguel hadn't changed. Margaret had. And in changing, she discovered that the most valuable assets in any building aren't the corner offices or the quarterly profits, they're the human beings walking the halls, each carrying a story worth hearing, a talent worth nurturing, a life worth honoring.